Before I get into the heart of my homily, I wanted to share two pieces of information for you from the Archdiocese. And the first one, there was a priest. His name is Father Michael Saporito. I think some of you will remember he served here at our parish from 2001 to 2004, and he was just selected by Pope Francis to be one of our 3 new auxiliary bishops. So it's a very exciting time for us, as well as a parish, that Father Michael, that so many of you remember and love, he will now be one of our new bishops. And one of the first things he's going to do, I'm going to have him bless our new daily Mass chapel when it's all said. So we're going to try to tie those two things in together. And then the second thing has to do with the coronavirus scare that's going around. The Archdiocese has asked us that at all parishes, during the time of the sign of peace, that we just bow to each other, wave, smile or whatever, but not have physical contact with each other. So we're going to really try to do that. Now, if as a family you still want to hug or hold hands or whatever, knock yourselves out. We're not going to enforce it, but that's what we're going to try to do to avoid the spread of germs. So now the heart of my homily, you could guess where it's going. It has to do with today's readings. The first reading we have all about Adam and Eve in the garden, and the devil comes and tempts them. And then Jesus, obviously at the end of the gospel there, is battling with the devil, who's also trying to tempt him, trying to knock him off the rails, so to speak. So we know temptation is a reality in the life of everyone that's in the Bible. It's also the reality of the life of each and every one of us. There truly is a devil who is trying to trying to get us not to be the best Christians we can be. Someone who's trying to push us in the opposite direction. And I have to say, I've always been very impressed with Pope Francis during these last 6 years. In my memory, he's the Pope that's spoken the most about the reality of evil, the most about the reality of the devil in the world. But I remember he was saying, but we have to make sure we have it clear in our minds what we're talking about. Sometimes we have this image in our minds of, this guy with these red leotards on and kind of like a pitchfork, and we're thinking that, that's the image of the devil, right? It's a cute little image, but the devil is a lot more subtle than that and a lot more insidious. And it's a reality. There's evil in our world. And who's the one that's always trying to tempt us? It's always the devil who's trying to tempt us to do the wrong thing or to avoid doing the good things that we should in our lives. So I wanted to share with you a wonderful book. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of it. This book, I have to say, really helped me to understand the reality of the evil one in the world. And it's written by the very famous author, C.S. Lewis. I'm sure many of you read some of his books. But this one is called The Screwtape Letters. The Screwtape Letters, C.S. Lewis said, was the hardest book that he had to write. And I actually think it's one of his best books. And what it is, it's a series of letters from a senior devil to a junior devil, trying to explain to the junior devil, this is how you get Christians to become defocused. This is how you get them to fall off the rails. And he goes through all these different things. And C.S. Lewis said it was so hard to write because he had to keep referring to the enemy. And obviously the enemy of the devil is God. So throughout the book, when you hear the enemy, you have to remember when you're reading it, but he's actually speaking about God. And one of the most powerful parts I found was when he was speaking about time. And the senior devil writes to the junior devil, and he goes, our task is to get people to either live in the past or to live in the future. Because the now, the present moment, that's the enemy's territory. We don't want people living in the present moment. We want them to live in the past where they have regrets about the sins of the past or things that could have been or whatever it might have been, or worrying about the future and thinking about the future, and if this happens or that happens, what will happen to me? And by doing that, we're missing out on the most important moment of our lives. And the most important is the now moment, when we can actually change, when we can actually grow in grace. The past and the future are out of our control. And he says that's the territory of the enemy, the territory of God. And I have to say, in reading that book, And I remember, I think that's chapter 4. Remember, after finishing that, it gave me a greater appreciation for one of the first prayers we all learned as children. And it's the Hail Mary prayer. We ask Mary to pray for us at the two most important moments of our lives, now and at the hour of our death. That moment, the hour of our death, when each one of us will be standing before God in the light of God, and we'll have to give an accounting for what we've done or failed to do. And in that, we ask Mary to help us in those two really key moments. But now, as I said, living in the past, sometimes the problem comes that there are unresolved sins of the past that we carry around with us. And so this next part of my homily, I want to focus on one of the greatest gifts that we have as Catholics, but one of the most underutilized sacraments in our church. You can probably guess where I'm going with this, right? The sacrament of reconciliation, the sacrament of confession, as we call it, or penance. I remember as a young boy, my grandparents used to explain to me that every Saturday afternoon into Saturday evening, people, all good Catholics, would line up to go to confession on Saturday. That way you could receive communion on Sunday morning. But every single week they would go. Now, personally, I think that's an exaggeration. I don't really think you need to go every week unless there's some special circumstance. I personally try to go once a month. What the church tells all of us to do, and number 1347 of the Catechism, is that all of us as Catholics are supposed to go to confession once a year. Once a year is when we should go as a minimum. But I've often said to people, well, that's just the minimum. There's actually, I think, 3 wonderful moments when we could go. The season of Advent, the season of Lent, which we're just beginning, and then usually kind of like at the end of the summer holidays. But if that's too hard to remember, I want you to think of this. And you don't have to raise your hands, but think if you would raise your hand. How many of you have been to the dentist in the last year? Right? My guess is that all of our hands are going to go up. And if they're not, I can recommend a few good dentists to you. I go twice a year to my dentist. Now, if I think 99% of our hands would be raised with that. Now, if the next question was, how many have been to confession in the last year? I'm afraid about 30, 70, 50% of the hands would go down. It's a beautiful sacrament. It's a sacrament that's severely underutilized. I strongly encourage all of us to really reconsider. If you haven't been in years or decades, it's okay. Come to confession. We'll warmly welcome you. But come. It's part of our reality of being Catholics, and it allows us to live fully in the present moment. Now, I want to end my homily with a story that actually got me in trouble a number of years ago. So I hope it doesn't get me in trouble this morning. But it's about a priest who was hearing confessions. And he was hearing confessions, a bunch of school kids. This class came in to have their confessions heard. And the first kid comes in, he says, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I talked back to my mom, and I hit my little sister, and I threw peanuts in the pond." And the priest says, okay, say 1 hour, Father, and whatever, go on. Second kid comes along, and she says, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I cursed, I copied on a test, and I threw peanuts in the pond." And the priest's like, "Okay, well, say 1 Hail Mary," and et cetera, et cetera. Third kid comes in, blah, 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 threw peanuts in the pond. Fourth kid, blah, 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 threw peanuts in the pond. So by the 6th or 7th kid, the priest says to the kid who comes, he said, "Well, you shouldn't throw food out. That's a sin. Say 2 Hail Marys and go on with your life." So finally, the last kid comes. And he goes, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I was disrespectful to my teacher. I stole a piece of gum from my mom's pocketbook. I was disrespectful." And the priest goes, "Right, and you threw peanuts in the pond, right?" Kid goes, "No." He goes, "Father, I'm peanuts." on peanuts. The reason why that story got me in trouble is there was a little girl at that Mass when I first told that story, and I had just been in her CCD classroom, and I had talked to him about the seal of confession and how a priest can never violate it. So right after Mass, she made a beeline to me with her hands on her hip, and her mother was behind her saying, like, you deal with her, you know? And she goes, Father Stephen, you promised that a priest would never break the seal of confession. And I had explained to her it was a joke and everything. But I was so happy that she understood the seal of confession. Whatever you come in with, whatever baggage, leave it at the foot of Jesus. Whatever you say will always be under the seal of confession. And I strongly encourage all of us to make use of this wonderful gift that God has given us, the sacrament of reconciliation. So if you haven't been in the last year, really make the effort to go during this Lenten season. Because I really believe that if we do that, and if we get into the regular practice, then whenever the now moment meets the hour of our death, we'll be perfectly peaceful. Because we'll know that we're at peace with God and that we're freed of all of the sins of our past. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit.